Hello, it's Catherine Hamilton here, and thank you for tuning in. It's a real pleasure to be part of the eighth Insight into Parkinson's Disease conference. As you can see, the title of my presentation is somewhat paradoxical, given that we're talking about Parkinson's disease, but bear with me. So this is what we're covering today, essentially the first 10 years of the clinical findings of photobiomodulation. Now, we'll start with definitions and explanations, just so that we're all on the same page. We'll talk about the early years in this whole research area. Then we'll move on to the non-motor or non-movement symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and also the critical thing, the effect of photobiomodulation on PD progression. And finally, how best to use photobiomodulation in Parkinson's disease. So the definitions are two things that are important to start about: a disease progression and photobiomodulation. Okay, disease progression. Well, the word progression is a bit of a tricky one because it can be a positive or a negative. If I'm learning the piano, my teacher tells me I'm progressing well, that's really good. But if my neurologist tells me my Parkinson's is progressing, that's bad. Essentially, disease progression is bad. So that's not good. So let's move on to some definitions. Parkinson's disease is a progressive movement disorder of the nervous system. So says the National Institute of Health of the US. It's a progressive movement disorder. Or it's a brain condition that causes lots and lots of problems. At the end bit, it gets worse with time. And that's another way of saying progressive. And then, of course, you have Billy Connolly, who has his own take on how to define it. And my disease creeps up on me. Every day it gets stranger and more different. Essentially, he's saying that it just keeps going. It is a progressive disease, and that's good. So one of the things we would love to do in Parkinson's disease management is to stop that progression. So let's look at photobiomodulation. It's a big word. From now on, I'm going to use the word lights because it's just so much easier. It's defined by Michael Hamblin, who's essentially the grandfather of this whole area of research, as the use of red or near-infrared light to stimulate, heal, regenerate and protect tissues that have been injured or are degenerating or else at risk of dying. That's pretty amazing. So what is it about red and near-infrared lights that make them so special? Well, firstly, they can penetrate through tissues. They don't bounce off the skin like blue or green light does. They actually penetrate well through. And if you put red and near-infrared lights on your head, it can penetrate through the skin, the hair, the skin, and the skull, and go into the outer layers of the brain and into the cortex, which is really very handy, as we'll see. By doing this, you get direct light on the cell mitochondria, which are the batteries inside the cell. And if you've got a cell that's not functioning well, for whatever reason, if you give a burst of life to its cell battery, its cell mitochondria, then great things start to happen. Firstly, the cell starts to do whatever it's meant to do. If it's a dopamine-producing cell, it starts producing dopamine. The other thing it does is it stimulates the cell nucleus and tells the nucleus to get cracking to create new brain cells. Back when I went to medical school, brain cells never regenerated. So once you'd lost them, that was it. That's what we were taught. Now we know better. You can regenerate brain cells, and red and near-infrared lights through the skull into the brain can do that. The other thing that happens is angiogenesis, which is a fancy name for increasing the number of blood vessels. The mitochondria send out a lot of cascades of activity after they've been stimulated by the light. And there's activity outside the brain cells as well. And that stimulates the walls of neighbouring blood vessels to start sprouting new little ones. So you end up with a lot more blood coming to the tissues, which is very handy. And that means it brings more oxygen and more glucose, which is extremely handy. So just covering what's happened. I've got some lovely photos here. The top one on the right is Professor John Mitrofanis, and the one underneath is Professor Alim Benabed, who's wearing a coronet. So 2010 was the first study of an animal model of transcranial red and near-infrared lights, and it was done by Professor John Mitrofanis and Alim Benabed. John is the world expert on Parkinson's disease and photobiomodulation. Alim Benabid is the expert and creator of the deep brain stimulation system. So if you know anyone who has that, they have Professor Benabid to thank for that. In 2016, a volunteer with Parkinson's disease decided to try transcranial lights. They weren't flash. And here it is. It was essentially a bucket with LEDs sort of stuck into it. And he did rather well. 2017, I set up a blog so that which still exists with instructions about how to make your own light hat. These days, there's another version called the Cossack, which is far better. Instructions are on the blog. In 2018 came the Duo Coronet, which used the work of John Mitrofanis and his team in its wavelength selection and in the way it covered the whole head. A few years later came the intranasal coronase, which is essentially lights up your nose. And you see, I have to be very careful saying lights up your nose because I could easily make a rude sign accidentally. But it's quite a good look when you have lights over your head and then lights up your nose as well. Very splendid. In 2024, there was some research on a 5-year follow-up on an initial light exposure in people with Parkinson's. And really, since 2016, there's been a lot of careful observations been going on, whether it's from users, their carers, their family members, but also clinicians. So back in 2016, when we made bucket lights hats for people with Parkinson's disease, and have a look at the one on the top on the right there, one gentleman was not impressed about wearing a bucket on his head. He insisted it had to be covered, so it didn't look so bucket-like. So we looked for safety. That's the obvious thing. Were there any safety concerns about it? We looked to see whether people would actually use it twice a day. Is it something they could fit into their schedule? We clearly looked for adverse side effects. And then in people with Parkinson's, we were totally focused on the motor or the movement problems, particularly looking for tremor and for changes in the way they walked. So what did we find? Well, number one, it's safe. Which is wonderful. We knew it would be, but because that's what the research had been indicating, but it's lovely to have that confirmed. We had high compliance. We asked people to use it twice a day, and they did. And it seemed that it wasn't a burden, once they got in the hang of it, it wasn't a burden. And in fact, a lot of people quite look forward to it. We noticed improvements in motor science. We noticed improvements in the tremor. We noticed improvements in walking. The gait was more fluid. The dragging of the foot seemed really lessened. We also noticed improvements in fine finger movement. So people who couldn't do up shirt buttons beforehand were now able to do that again. So that was really good. We also found there's no adverse side effects, although some fellas sprouted a bit more hair on their head. To our surprise and amazement, and definitely to our delight, we noticed improvement in non-motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease. Now, these tend to be a bit forgotten. Everyone sees it as a movement disorder, but it's more than that. So what is the big deal about non-motor symptoms? They have much more impact on quality of life in people with Parkinson's disease compared with the movement problems. Yes, a tremor is annoying. Yes, it's annoying when you can't walk as well. But if you have some of these non-motor symptoms, that blights your life an awful lot more. One or more non-motor symptom occurs in everyone with Parkinson's disease. And often these are the things that start up to decades before a formal diagnosis is made. And the third thing about them is that they're horrible. There's just no other word for it. They are horrible. Yes, I know this is turning into the unreadable slide, and I am sorry, but these are some of the non-motor symptoms: the fatigue, the sleep problems, depression, the apathy, couldn't be bothered doing anything, anxiety, problems with thinking and concentrating, loss of sense of smell, no sense of taste, constipation, no joy, and also no joy in life, unrelated to constipation, a diminished sense of self and a kind of disengagement from family and friends. These are just some of them. If you ask people with Parkinson's what are the worst things about the wretched disease, they will say the fatigue, sleep problems, and depression as kind of the key ones. So let's have a look at the most common non-motor symptoms. This comes from a study of non-motor symptom prevalence in people with Parkinson's disease or people who report it. So fatigue is a big one with 66%. So 2/3 of people with Parkinson's feel permanently tired. Concentration and anxiety, sleep problems, forgetting things, feeling a bit sad. About half the people with Parkinson's report that, those kinds of symptoms. Between a third and a half feel absolutely unmotivated, can't be bothered doing anything, totally apathetic, lose their sense of smell, forget to do things, or lose interest in life. And nearly a third express anhedonia, which is loss of joy in life, which is a scary thing, really is a scary thing. So let's have a look if there's treatment available, standard treatment available for these symptoms. If you look, I've either said no or problematic. And problematic is a medical term meaning, well, yes, there is something we could use, but actually it's probably not going to work that well for a number of reasons. So essentially there's no treatment available for these horrible non-motor symptoms. So what do we find over the 10 years of people who had these non-motor symptoms and then used transcranial lights twice daily? We found that their symptoms improved, fatigue improved, problems concentrating improved, anxiety and sleep problems improved, a sense of smell and sense of taste, of being able to taste the roast chicken again, that improved. A lot, I've only given you some of them here, but there was improvements with them. So that was a bit astonishing because particularly with something as difficult as apathy, which is associated with a faster disease progression, to see apathy go in someone and to see them get motivation back in their lives and start doing things again is pretty unbelievable because it's never been seen before in Parkinson's disease. And to see someone get their sense of smell back, same thing, no one's seen it before. It just doesn't happen. So in essence, daily transcranial lights improve the motor and definitely the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. And yes, another unreadable slide with a whole bunch of things that we have noticed improve in people who have been using light hats. And I can talk about those another day. So the next question is obviously, can these improvements last? Is it just a flash in the pan and then the improvements go away, or can they last? Short answer is, yeah, they can. As long as the transcranial lights are used daily, because stopping wearing your light hat results in the loss of symptoms. The symptoms, rather way around, return of symptoms. They come back. Sometimes they can come back within a 24-hour period, and for others it takes a bit longer. I've had so many people report to me that they've left their coronet at home during and gone on an extended holiday and noticed that things started going badly. And as soon as they got home, started wearing their coronet again. And over the next few weeks, the improvements returned. So it's obviously, it's essentially a battery recharge is going on every day. So back in 2019, Dr. Anne Liebert, you can see her photo up in the top there, and her team did a 12-week study of some people with Parkinson's disease and looking at mainly motor problems and but a few non-motor as well, and gave them transcranial lights. After the 12 weeks was finished, they gave them all a coronet, and here's one. This is Margaret, who is one of the participants. 5 years later, Anne and her team went back to talk to them to see how they'd been getting on. and found that they'd actually been doing rather well. So compared with what they presented with at the beginning of the study in 2019, they now had better gait with faster walking, had better movement, better quality of life and sleep and cognition, sense of smell and microbiome. For each person, it was a bit different, in terms of the degree of these changes. So that was another piece of evidence that if you use your lights every day, preferably twice, you can keep those symptoms at bay. So some feedback from Coronet users. So this chappie has been using the transcranial light hat for 2 years. And he emailed me to say, we both remain happy about my overall lack of progress. I really chuckled at that. And the we refers to him and also his neurologist. The wife of a chap I first met in 2019 emailed me recently saying his condition is better than when you first saw him. They've moved away, so I haven't been able to see him again. But that was really wonderful. His condition wasn't good when I did see him back then. Another one who's been using Coronet since 2020 comments it's an insurance policy against PD progression. And I think that's a good summary. And another lady who started using her Coronet in 2020 and uses it religiously twice daily is still singing. Singing is a very important part of her life. She's been always in choirs, done lots of solos, and back in 2020 she was losing her voice quality and quantity. She was really having difficulty keeping up in the choir. But her voice came back and it's still good. She's still singing lustily. So I'm sure I've convinced you this is a really good idea. So what you need to look for in a light device to get the best out of it, you need a fair amount of power to penetrate into the brain. So look at the power levels and compare them. You need full head coverage. You need to have it all over your head because that helps with penetration. If you have little bits of light here and there, not so good. No good standing in front of a red light panel and hoping that'll work because you'll just get a bit from that panel, but not that full head coverage. If you add in an intranasal element, you get more light underneath the brain, and that adds to the improvement that you can get. The type of lights, use LEDs. They're the safest and easiest to use. And wavelengths, these two have been found by Professors Mitrofanos and Aline Benabid to have the best effect if they're used in sequence. There's a couple of reasons for that, but I won't go into that today. So if you have Parkinson's disease, you can slow the progression of the rotten thing. I can't urge you more strongly to make transcranial lights part of your daily routine. They're safe, they're effective for motor and non-motor problems. There's no adverse effects. You might get a bit more hair growth. Sorry about that. And as well, they reduce the obstacles to exercise, which, as you'll know from your work with PD Warrior, exercise is another thing that can slow the disease progression in Parkinson's. And you can even make your own. So if you Google red lights on the brain, you'll get to the blog and it's got the instructions there. So thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of the Insight into Parkinson's seminar. Bye. I never can turn these things off.